Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? The first item on the agenda is approval of the November 2022 minutes. Those minutes were circulated. I noted one correction on the last page of the regular minute. The third paragraph down, it's Fowler moved to defer the review, not differ the review, defer the review of 22 PSB 4699. So that's just a typo there. Are there any other additions or corrections to the minutes?
I wasn't here.
Okay, I thought that Sharon wasn't here.
Was Janet here?
I think Janet was here.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
I thought
she
she
was.
was here.
All right, so we just need to make that change. Are there any other additions or corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second, okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved as amended. Public agenda, no one had signed up. Is there anybody who wants to speak? There's a public agenda portion that hasn't signed up. Are you Dana? Yeah. We can do you in executive session. That's fine. Seeing no one else, Captain, staff report.
Hey, good afternoon. So what I thought we'd do today on the staff report, as we go through this, I will cover the basic part like I normally do. Twyla, I'm still working on what we talked about in the November meeting to get the specific percentages on those numbers in the gender and race. It's a little clunky, and I want to make sure we get the right things for you. So I'm still working on that. I think we've got the pie charts and stuff to match up now, so with the numbers and things like that. So I'm thinking it's getting cleaned up. Really, what I want to know is in these staff reports that, I was here for about half the year last year. Is there anything that you feel we're missing, that we're not getting to? Do you feel this gives you a good overview of where we're at with the PSB numbers? And this doesn't have to be a right now answer, but just something I've been thinking about is this, what we want to do moving forward, and is it giving us, and I should say you, a good representation of what you want? So just think about that even by the end of the meeting. If in the new business or something, there's something that you've thought of that you want to see differently or that would help you, just let me know and we'll work on that. As far as the, let me look at your packet. So I'm trying to go through the order with you here so I don't skip around on you. Or at least guide you.
I don't know if it makes any sense, but sometimes, it's hard to follow along and we're all looking at different pages. Is that something that you could just put up here and on the screen and go through? Or would that not enhance this experience?
If anything, it would make the writing smaller. You wouldn't really
Or harder to
see
read.
it.
Oh, okay.
But if we just go through it in the order of the packet, that's
Yes.
Yeah.
And
But there's no page numbers, so it's,
I think I'm going to start, because I noticed that too, because I always come up here with mine, how I have it in my mind. And then I've realized as we went on that you're all flipping around. So I think I'm going to try to get it in the same order every month and then have it how I read it. So I apologize for that. That's just me not thinking ahead far enough. Because, the way I have it here is it's in order, meaning November, then December, and then year end. But I typically go through the staff report and then ask for finalized complaints that the board has picked to review, just to keep it in order and how it is in your packet for this month. The first thing you have is the finalized complaint from November 1 through November 30 of 2022 with your color-coded sheet. Off of this sheet, which corresponds with the complaint summaries, which is 2 pages behind it. Is there anything that anybody has identified from the complaint summaries or from the finalized complaint sheet for November 1 through November 30th to request for review?
I had a question about complaint summaries, not for review purposes, but, and it may just be the way it is now recorded, but we, for the first time, are now getting a whole bunch of entries where an employee received coaching and mentoring for a citation error.
So the explanation of that is with our niche system and the implementation of our niche system, we started out by errors that were being entered into the system and having to be corrected as it went through the process were just being corrected. We've now had enough time where whether it's a officer, a records employee, whoever that is that's entering data and it's still being checked and caught as an error, we're now going to a coaching and mentoring on those employees to show them the errors, make sure that they're not continuing to do the same errors over and over. And then it's like a progressive type discipline where then if we identify employees that are continuously still doing those, whether it's retraining or whether there actually becomes discipline to it, the whole point is to obviously correct this. But that's why those 2 months and probably, I can't foresee, but that's why you're going to see a lot of those come
All
through.
right, so, but you're now opening a PSB number on each one of those?
If there's something associated with it that could lead to a discipline, then yeah. And you're going to have a lot of those for right now, and then hopefully they go right back off the list.
So, Captain, when we're looking at the report of finalized complaints, and there's a incident type of coaching and mentoring, and the allegation was general duty responsibilities, is that an administrative error of posting information incorrectly? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes. So if someone enters information incorrectly, and then it's later through the checks and balances caught on there, it's that it, at some point, whether it was an address, whether it was a date, whether something was in there that wasn't entered, and then finally, as it gets through all of the checks up through the supervisors, then it's all corrected and put into the system.
So it's administrative as opposed to a performance issue?
Correct. It is things as simple as a time, a date, something like that.
It's remarkable that some of these are received and completed within just a matter of a day or two, because usually we see quite a bit of time.
Right.
So, but then there's others, same, general duty responsibilities without explanation, and it can take nearly a month.
So some of that can be dependent on the supervisor. Some of these, the way the entries are dated, and I don't know if Keely knows on this part or not, or it might be strictly through PSB, but it's just some of them have the same date. That doesn't mean
Right.
that means where they were put into the PSB system as completed. So does that make sense?
Well, received and completed, same day?
And they could have been, yes.
Right, okay.
If the supervisor's there, the employee's there, and they have it and they're available to do it, then they can
Right.
do that.
Okay, so I guess, let me understand. Now, date completed, that's the date it's put into the system, or the date that the coaching and mentoring was done?
Like on any of these? Like where it says, because the majority of these are entered in there, I believe, on the left-hand date, is that correct?
So, the coaching and mentoring itself will take place whenever the supervisor and the employee are there. The date that you're seeing for it being received, more than likely, is the date that the actual coaching and mentoring took place. However, it could also be the date that the supervisor entered that into the system. So if the coaching and mentoring took place today and the supervisor doesn't get to it until tomorrow, they might not change that date. So it'll have tomorrow's date on there, then it gets pushed through to professional standards showing that the coaching and mentoring occurred. And then at that point, the completed date could be that same date, or it could be that following day. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's why it's such a short time frame for coaching and mentoring
I see, okay.
sometimes.
And when you have a backlog too, where if it gets to PSB and they have multiple entries to close out that are sitting there, then they could close several coaching mentorings at one day, depending on the detective that gets in and has to close them out.
With regard to the finalized complaint summaries, I suggest we pull case number 22 PSB 5200.
5200?
5200, all right.
Captain Easter, how many complaints do we have in queue?
And I remember that email, I want to say, I had that printed off, and I don't know where I left that at, the one we
Five?
had the other day. It was somewhere in the 7 range, I want to say.
The ones that I have, I summarized in the email to the board. Six, not counting the ones we're reviewing today. That was based on the information you.
So that's what we've tracked from past meetings. And then I think that can also be something that if you want to talk about it during item number 6, where we talk about citizen requests for PSV or case review or case identified, where we're still trying to figure out on a whole subcommittee thing on whether some of those we could go back and evaluate. Should we just put them there and see if the subcommittee can review them, or were they citizen complaints in the first, or citizen requests to be reviewed in the first place, and kind of go that route too?
I thought we might today pull out at least 3 of these cases, including the one I just identified perhaps, for a subcommittee review, and then have 3 volunteers that participate and see if that will expedite the process.
We can see if we can cut some backlog out. Okay. Any other suggestions on where we're at for November? Okay, and then we'll do the same thing on the finalized complaints with your color-coded sheet for December 1 through December 31 of 2022, which has your color code sheet and then the finalized summaries behind it as well.
On the finalized complaints, December 1, December 31, is the first itemized listed, the 22 PSB 770. Was that a multiple officer in case?
We'll look at the summary. Yes, it was.
Like to pull that one for review as well.
And then I'd like to pull 22 PSB 5394. I'm assuming those 3 words, criminal conduct prohibited, means an officer did something criminal?
Yeah, so, and then like if you look on the summary, it is alleged a department member committed a misdemeanor crime. A criminal conduct prohibited is not sustained on that, so yeah, but that's what that is saying, the criminal conduct prohibited. So 22 PSB 5394.
Yes.
Good. Anyone else have any other case they'd like to pull? Captain, what else do you have on your report?
And then just on that last page where we have always covered the incident types, when you look at our year-to-date total from January 1 through December 31 of 2022, the three allegation types that had led the whole year were the three that ultimately were the top three investigative allegations of the insubordination to 3.1301B, the general duty responsibilities, 31916B, 916B, and contact with citizens, 3.302B. And then, like I said, we can keep working on the monthly things if there's other things that you'd like to see. As far as following up then on the staff report, that's all I have for that.
If I could
Go ahead.
add one thing, can you get the gender race data for the entire year of 2022?
I think if we can get it bi-monthly, then we can take that into a yearly. I'm still trying to figure out how we get that monthly percentage right.
Right.
But I would think if we can get that,
I mean, we'll get in the ballpark, right? I mean, certainly, staffing levels change, right? But I mean, I think we can get in the ballpark.
no, I believe we can, yes. That is what I have for staff report for item number 4.
All right. Captain, one of the things that we talked about in the prior staff report, and I know you and the chief had a conversation about it, relates to policies that are no longer published.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that those are the 900 level policies, I think.
Yes. Majority of them, yes.
And and as you know, some of those policies were previously published. In fact, I think all of them were at one point. I would think that maybe at our next meeting, we'd want to have an agenda item that identifies all of the policies that the department has that are considered critical and confidential or non-published, so that we can talk about whether or not those policies ought to be published or the publishing could be reinstated. As I've expressed, I know that some of those policies are like racial profiling policy, for example, and so I think that, and they were published for a long time, and so I'm kind of curious about why that happened, but why don't we put it on an agenda item then?
We can put it on an agenda item.
And then-
The last update I did have was when Interim Chief Livingston was still here, and I know he was directly working on getting those taken care of, and I didn't get another answer back on that, but I'll recheck on that, and we can set it for an agenda item.
I think it actually may have been a series of miscommunications why they got taken off, but
That's my belief.
if we put it on agenda, then we can really talk about it.
I understand. Yeah, we will do that. And I'll have an answer for you.
All right.
Jay, before you move on, could I ask a question?
Sure.
I know I'm new to this, but I've been coming for about 2 years now, and I've looked at these almost every month, and I have a hard time figuring out how it is that we would decide as a board which cases to actually review. For example, on the last page of your summary, you have the year-to-date finalized complaints for January 1st through December of 2022, 245 external and 227 internal. But most of the ones I see here are all internal complaints. I'm not sure, if I'm not mistaken, only about 4 or 5 of the external were actually sustained. So where would we find those external complaints and how they were adjudicated and investigated?
So every closed complaint, internal or external, is placed on those sheets that you get, either in a summary for the month, and that same sheet that you get that's color-coded has every closed complaint for the month, the prior month when we review them. So every complaint is on there. So at some point throughout 2022, whatever that number totals out to be, 400 and whatever, were all on summary sheets provided the next month prior of the month prior.
These descriptions are very broad and very general. It's hard to know what they actually mean. Like I see 161 internal complaints, looks like insubordination, but I'm not sure. You've got 4 or 5 categories of insubordination. How would we know whether that has something to do with how they dealt with the public?
I'm not quite sure how to explain that to you. So what we tried to do because we've had conversations in the past, and what we tried to do, like on the color-coded sheet that we go through, when you talk about, say, conduct unbecoming cases, which are coded in yellow, right? Anything coded in yellow on here on a conduct unbecoming case is coded in yellow if it's a C violation or higher. There's multiple different allegations that fall under conduct unbecoming, correct? But the ones that the board has asked that they want to be made aware of specifically are ones that are at a C violation or higher, where you're talking about some type of a suspension. If you're talking about insubordination, meaning like what is 3.207B, that is the one that deals with rude conduct, and 9 times out of 10, that's going to be in conduct in dealing with a citizen or an external complaint usually.
Well, how does the board decide which of these cases to actually review?
We look at the summaries.
Summaries.
This sheet,
Pardon?
the summary, we look at this sheet.
Those are very vague. How would you know enough to be able to decide?
There's 2 ways to do it. We look at them, and I think I agree that we've talked about expanding the summaries, and we've had discussions and all that. We tend to look at cases where there's been a use of force, or what I would call departmental integrity, or conduct unbecoming. Tends to be the ones we look at. And for example, today, we picked out several cases, 770, 22 PSP 770, I selected because it had to do with a failure to supervise, multiple failures to comply with policy and investigation, including both sustained and unsustained findings. That seemed to be a case that has some complexity and might involve supervision. The Twyla designated one that was an allegation of a potential crime. That makes sense. There is the other one I designated for from the November summaries was a complaint by a citizen who said the officers treated him unfairly and treated him as a threat. I look at the allegation of insubordination, which would be some kind of a failure to comply with rules, unfounded. But then there was coaching and mentorings with regard to the use of force. So that tells me that there's been some force question. So that seemed to be a case that involved a citizen complaint, where at least a citizen may have been concerned that the force or the display of force was inappropriate. So that seemed like an appropriate case. That's how we do that. The other way we do it is, and this is where we really hope, the citizens have the ability to flag a case for us. They have the ability to ask, and we get requests from time to time, and that's another way to do it. And of course, a great number of these cases, you know, now we have all the citation error cases, that's why I asked the question, but a lot of them are so routine and of not particular consequence. But you are right, it's hard to tell from this. So we're just doing a selection of cases based on the way they have reported it. That's how we do it. And so, yes, we can miss stuff, absolutely.
Yeah, it's trying to find a needle in a haystack, isn't it?
Well, once you start reading this and seeing it and see how the reporting made, you start to see a fact or a situation that flags it for you. Like the multiple officer involved, failure to supervise, that's a red flag, for example. The report should be categorized as a use of force. So, okay, the use of force means something. And we tend to pull those cases. And then sometimes we pull cases and absolutely nothing to them, in fact, the majority of times. But the key is, and this is what I mentioned many times, is if a citizen feels their complaint needs to be evaluated, they can tell us. So we have to put some of the responsibility out into the community as well. If somebody asks us to review a case, we probably will review it.
And who writes the summaries here in this column, the summary?
I do.
Who
I do.
wordsmiths that?
I do.
You do.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm trying to be clear, if you have a need for confidentiality on one hand, but transparency on the other, is there any way to get this more specific so we have a better idea of what it is that you're actually talking about?
I don't feel there is, because I try to give you a picture of what it is. I think I try to understand what the board's looking for, but you start to go into any much further detail on many of these cases, and you're starting to get into the case itself or the investigation itself, which this goes out into the public. So I understand what you're asking. I understand your dilemma. I don't have a better answer for it at this point, other than we try to, through these summaries and through how we're coding this for the board. And I believe what Mr. Fowler says is true, that once you see it, it doesn't take you a long time as a board member to pick up on what it is you think you want us to look at. You can tell me if I'm wrong here in a couple months, but I feel it works so far, and I think, that the board in general has been okay with how we've tried to make it better in giving you a selection process.
I recall the discussion after the text messages were discovered. Otis was referring to it as an act of God. He just happened to say, pick this one. And there was nothing about that, description that would say this is an important one, but now we have a case that was very clearly something that should have never happened in this city.
Well, yeah, but Walt, you need to understand that that case was picked the first time it showed up,
Yeah.
and it was picked for a reason. I mean, the detailed facts were not known when it was selected for review, but it was selected for review the very first time it showed up because of the nature of the description.
And he decided this was something I wanted to follow up on. That's great. I mean, but it wasn't clear enough in the description necessarily what it was about until you got into the case and said, my God, what is this?
Well, Walt,
So I'm wondering, is there any way to make these more specific?
if in your review of the summary statements that are provided for each incident, you feel it's unclear to you what is involved or you have further questions, you can ask the captain when we're sitting here, and he can give you certain embellishments on this one sentence description to satisfy your curiosity as to whether it warrants review.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we are. I don't know how else to.
Well, these reports take a tremendous amount of staff time to prepare. I realize that. Very well done in terms of itemizing everything in chronological order, dates, and so forth. You've got the time in, the time out. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of effort on a whole bunch of people's part. But if we can't get to the bottom line fairly quickly and decide which of these cases really have importance to investigate, I'm not sure how it helps this board. Maybe I just missed the point.
Well, part of the reason, I think, at least the reason I've stepped back from this a little bit is because we're waiting on the consultant's report, and there's going to be a component about the CRB. So I haven't pushed like I might have for the description, just because we don't know hopefully we'll have something coming that will be a little bit different, but.
I don't know, but
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I guess that's my answer is, I try to give you a picture of them. We've tried to color highlight ones that the board has indicated they want highlighted that are important to them. And I can't go into full descriptions on all of these cases.
Do you realize how much paper you'd have to read? I mean, we're already we're already inundated with paper, and so,
Well, and I'm not trying to be smart, Mr. Chappell, but the truth of it is, you talk about external complaints and like rude conduct with citizens. If there are 97 of those in a year, there's zero way for the board to start to get through those, right? When we have typically 2 cases that we can select per month to review because of the time it takes to review those, you're right, you're not going to hit every case every time. That's why we try to highlight the ones that the board has deemed are more important to them as a whole to review.
Captain, when you're going through the complaints, external complaints, and there's a complaint of, racist behavior or racist language or something like that, because I don't really see any of that in the descriptions. I mean, I assume there's some, right? And then that might help us clue in on cases.
I could tell you, and this is from me in my head from doing, if there's something that alleges that, I put it in there. Now, because there's nothing about that specific thing, just saying that citizen when an officer used racist terms against them. That doesn't divulge the case.
Right.
So if something like that is in there, just like I put in there that, yes, it's not a thorough explanation, but I put in there that a citizen accused an officer of committing a misdemeanor crime.
Right.
That gave you enough to understand, I would like to look at that. And so if I can keep it to that, but it's something I know that you would want to see and key in on, then that's what I try to do.
Now, we pulled one on a racial comment not too long ago.
Yeah.
And reviewed it.
Yeah.
Because you had that kind of comment in
So
there.
I don't keep that stuff out of there, but I don't put, multiple paragraphs about it.
So if somebody says profiling, they're filing a complaint because they suspect profiling.
I think I put that
Then you would put
in there, yeah.
profiling in there.
I mean, I can go back and look at some point, but I'm sure that I put that simple alternative. In fact, no, we had one.
Yeah, I mean, one, but I mean,
but I
it's a
mean-
big department, it's a lot of complaints, right? It
I don't
seems
know.
disproportionately low.
Could be. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I just don't know. But like, we did review one, an executive, 3 months ago, where a lady had said that she was racially profiled,
Yeah.
and we put that directly in there and we reviewed it. So I don't keep that stuff out of there. I just don't put anything that would identify the specific case.
Does anybody else review this after you have it completed before it comes to this board?
I'm the last one who approves it.
Okay,
Like, I create it, and then it's my document.
okay, and nobody else looks at it?
No, I don't know if the deputy chief or chief ever do look at that, but they don't like approve it. And so-
In the past, I know, the chief's office would approve it or finalize
Yeah,
it, but I don't.
It's kind of changed into, I do stuff and it's my I take responsibility for it. It is my document. So I'll put it that way to you.
This final page here is year-to-date again. So on the left-hand column, seems like most of these are internal complaints. Am I correct? Or do you have a similar column for the external so we can see why it is only 4 or 5 out of 245 complaints are actually sustained?
You're talking about the year-to-date. So if you look at the incident type, right, these, in the graph, you might not be able to see it, but there's 52% external and 48% internal.
Yeah, I see that, but on the left-hand column, it says totals. You got reporting sick leave, about 5 or 6 column or items on that.
Right.
Reporting requirements, misconduct prohibited, insubordination. Most of those would be internal, right? So where's the similar column of the types of complaints that you're receiving from the community?
Guess I'm not sure what you're asking.
What page are you on?
The last page of the report is a summary of all the complaints for
Oh, the last,
2022.
There's a difference.
The last page before this.
You have a section about the use of the vehicles, department vehicles, and correspondence to the department. And
So take insubordination, 3.1301B, out of 163 complaints. That can be a combination of internal and external.
I see the totals, I don't see the types of complaints. Like here, you've broken down all the ones for internal. I don't see anything listed for external from the citizens of our city.
Walt, the in monthly finalized complaint summaries identifies what's an internal and what's an external complaint. It's tied to the description of the case. So if you go to the first page of the December 1, you'll see that the first one's internal. You go down, and then 5 or 6 there, it says complaint, and when it says complaint, that's an external complaint. If it says internal investigation or internal complaint, then it's internal. So you get the flavor of what's internal or external by looking at the individual case summary.
And I believe all of these are on the website with the minutes or with the agendas, like
They're all
each
posted
month?
similar, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to stick to minutes, but yes, they are.
I
they
see
should be posted.
a few external, internal. When we say complaint, is that from a citizen?
That's
or not?
external.
This is citizen complaint?
So you can go down and look and identify each case, maybe not always, but generally identify when the citizens complain. We need to move on. Is there anything else, Captain?
No, sir.
I just have a point of clarification to make sure I understand your terms. General duty responsibilities, when that's the allegation. And I think, ask if that was administrative. Is that all just administrative? I mean, what does general duties responsibilities mean? They didn't check the right box when they did their report, or what?
We had that when we wrote them all down, and we went through them a couple meetings ago. Do you have where you can pull up 3.9?
It's a complete and thorough investigation. So complete and thorough for the general duty responsibilities. When Jay had mentioned seeing the summary for the citation error, that's the description it would go underneath. There's also some instances where an officer might be coached and mentored for a complete and thorough investigation. They might be investigated for a complete and thorough investigation. It's just all being lumped together under that one directive.
So it's basically how they did their job?
Some of it is administrative, and some of it may not be.
If a citizen complains that an officer came out to their house and didn't, they say something was taken or something was stolen, and an officer disregards them, and they say, they didn't make a report, they didn't do anything, it could be investigated that way.
Right, they didn't conduct a complete investigation. Whereas
Sometimes-
on the administrative side, if you're entering something into niche, forget a date or whatnot, you're not completing your paperwork, and that's the administrative portion of it.
Okay, so it's a mix,
Yeah.
It could be, yes.
basically.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Some of these policies do catch internal and external quite a bit.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to know what exactly I was looking at. Just like it says cooperation. What does that mean? There was a lack of cooperation between the officer and the person, or a lack of cooperation on the job, or,
If you look at the cooperation 3.405A, that's for gossiping.
I'm sorry, say that again?
3.405A is gossiping.
Gossiping?
Yes.
It's right here.
Okay. That's really a concern. Okay.
We've had this talking, I'll move on. We've had the talking before. These are just allegations that are cited out of all the regulations, but even that's a lot, right? So when we talk about internally, Are we managing people? Are we doing the right thing? Out of all of these allegations throughout this year that are listed here, and there's a lot of them, but 48% of those are coming internally. So we are internally investigating officers, records personnel, anybody employed with the police department at the same rate that we're receiving external complaints.
Well, I just want to know what the terms meant so that I knew what I was looking at as far as.
See if I can find it again. There was something that we had provided at one point, and I think we've had that had an explanation with the most common directives that are always on these sheets and what the actual definition behind it was. I know we sent it out at one point.
Well, maybe so. I just had not seen so many general duty responsibilities and so that's why. So thank you. That's all. I just wanted to know what I was looking at here.
Gotcha.
Okay, let's go move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the traffic citation data report. And we put that on essentially on a monthly basis just to receive the report. And that, I assume that's the document we talked about.
It is. That's your next document in the packet. And Richard Dane is here again to run through it. I will, again, defer to the board on my plan is to have Richard run through the PowerPoint. If any questions exist, have them come afterwards and keep it to the time frame that you wanted to
Well, I was thinking that from the standpoint of, and that's why we had the discussion last time, that we wouldn't have a formal presentation every month on this, because that's just too cumbersome and takes too long.
Well, I agree with that, but I feel that some board members wanted it, and that's why I put it on here. That is totally a board decision on how you, if you just want data numbers or this type of information placed in the packet and not gone through, we can do that. I don't have, that's really a decision on how you want to receive the information and what you want to do.
I mean, the board can weigh in on this, and Walt has a particular interest in this, I know, but I would think that, if it's not too much of an administrative burden, go ahead and submit it as a packet item each time, but then periodically, quarterly or some time, then we could have an update, talk about trends or things of that nature. But I don't think it's necessary to talk about all the data set each time.
And the reason we said it this time was because we had the initial.
Right.
And I didn't know if there would be any more questions to it. But that is, like I said, that's a board decision. How you want it is how we'll.
How does the board want to handle this issue?
Well, I recall, and then it's pretty clear, I think, in my opinion, in the minutes, that there was a lot of feedback, and can you do this, can you do that? You showed us some pivot tables that look like you could do some pretty extraordinary things. I was interested if we could see if there's one officer who has a disproportionate number of tickets to people of color. Did you think that this was going to be more about kind of fine tuning, or did you have some feedback from?
You want to move into this now, into 5? Richard can come up here if you
All
want.
right.
And we can see how that goes, then we'll go from there.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, there was a couple changes to the report based on the feedback that Walt had given us. So it changed less about a large data set and more focused especially on what's called RRI, which is Relative Risk Index. And that has to do a lot with the population. So that's probably going to be the most interesting slide for everybody to look at, and I don't know how much you guys want me to go in depth for each slide, but if you guys have any questions, I can answer them.
So what page is the slide you're talking about?
It's going to be slide, and I think that one doesn't have one, but it would be page 6. The top of it is Black and Hispanic RRI analysis. It doesn't actually have a page number, but it's right after page 5.
Okay.
Thank you for numbering slides. So helpful.
Yeah, I covered this one up with a graphic, so I feel bad about that. But RRI is essentially you figure out the percentage risk of a certain group or more groups in this case and you compare that to a control group. So for us, our control group is going to be people or white individuals that have received citations versus the population for white individuals. And we compare that to black individuals or Hispanic individuals that have gotten citations versus the population for black individuals or Hispanic individuals. And I have the census data that I'm using down there. I wasn't able to get driving age because I know we tried to get that, but I got 18 plus, which I felt would be better representative than just the entire population. So the RRI that's listed here for the different categories, the categories were kind of hammered out by Walt and Sergeant Brian Safras, December, around there. And so we categorize the different citation charges into those categories. And then you can look at this chart and see where they fit in. We have two larger categories, non-moving and moving, and then different things underneath those categories that are in that category, and then we have a grand total. So the highest one is going to be the black RRI of license violations at 5.94. So that means that they're at risk like about 6 times more. And then the lowest would be Hispanic at 0.96, which is about 96% of what a white individual would experience. So that's kind of gives you the highest and the lowest for that. So.
And how, my question is, how did you come up with the RRI?
So the RRI is you take the amount of people, it's essentially like an equation. So we take the census data on the bottom, and then we take the number of people that have received citations for that census group on the top. We divide it to essentially get a percentage, and that's the percentage that of the population that's like at risk. It's a medical term, so that's why they use the term risk, and that gives us 1/2 of the equation. And that's the comparative group. And then we have the control group, which for us is the white population. So we have white individuals that have received citations for that category over the entire white population. And then when you divide those two, you get the RRI. So if the percentage is higher for a black individual, it would be higher on the RRI list compared to the white individual. So the only one that's actually less than 1, which means that they're at less risk, would be the speeding for Hispanics on the under moving.
Is the numerator in that calculation number of citations or number of individuals?
The number of citations. It's not number of
So
individuals.
there could be multiple citations to a single individual.
Correct.
In that total.
Yes.
Which would change if it was used.
Yeah, I did have one individual, or one issue was I had to pull a lot of citations from the court system, and this is kind of getting into the weeds, but when the niche system was first online, officers were allowed to enter paper citations directly into the court system. So that wasn't on my count from last time, so I had to manually transfer the data into the sheet this time, so that took up the majority of my time. But I do have that in there. Unfortunately, they don't have person IDs, so I wasn't able to mark unique individuals over a long period of time. So that was one thing I did want to do, but I could not.
But I guess it's, if you're consistent, against all racial categories, then it should wash out. Would you agree?
I don't know. I think I'd need to see the data.
Yeah.
Right, which I do have that. I did get that. I did promise you guys last time. I have that cleaned up. The file was too big. It would crash my computer whenever I manipulated the data. So I did shrink it down. I focused the columns, so I should be able to get that. I don't know, to Easter to email it out to the board members. So you guys will have the Excel file with all the data that I've used so far.
Who else sees this? I mean, does this go to the deputy chiefs? Does it go to the chief? Because, that 5.94 black RRI is kind of stunning. Not in a good way.
Kind of stunning.
Yeah.
So I send this data.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I send the data to the captain for preparation for this. Beyond that, I'm not sure.
So the answer to initially, before we did the initial presentation, I sat down with the chief and went over the presentation, what we were going to present for this month. or for this meeting. Richard did it. We went through it. We were going to see what your thoughts were on this, what the presentation looked like, what you wanted to do with it. And then I will go back after this meeting with recommendations, what you see, what you, just like that, what your thoughts are, and talk with the chief about that.
Well, I think at a minimum, we'd like his response, on that and some of these others. I mean, 4.49, I mean, a lot of these, don't bode well for what's going on in the department.
It shows what is somewhat suspected.
Okay.
That's what it does. It confirms some things. When you think about percentage of population.
Yeah.
Based upon this.
Yeah.
Can I speak to that just real quick? The categories that you're looking at, yeah, you're right, they are much higher. These are secondary violations. Okay, so the license, you're not being stopped because a person doesn't have a license. There is another stop or a legal reason to stop a vehicle, and then it is discovered that there is no license either with a person or if they do not have a valid license. At that point, that secondary violation is issued. Same with insurance, Mr. Curry, just to speak to that specifically. If there's no proof of insurance, when the citation is issued, there's an opportunity to show to show that insurance is in fact valid at a later point. But the fact is, it doesn't change the fact that the citation was issued. So I think context is extremely important in this particular incident. Same with a license. There is a later time that a license can be shown that it does exist, or if a person doesn't have it with them.
Right.
But, as I said before, it doesn't excuse the fact that a ticket has been issued, which does impact. So, and I'm not defending anything. I just want everyone to have context when we discuss this. I hope that helps a little bit.
Would it be safe to say that the moving violation triggered the insurance or license citation?
I'm so sorry. Say that again.
I'm just trying to establish the relationship, how a moving violation could ultimately affect the non-moving totals that we're tracking. Or is that just a category heading misunderstanding?
Yeah, if you look at it the way the state of Kansas looked at a moving violation, not having insurance or not having a license with you is considered a moving violation by the state of Kansas. So that's the problem that we're running into also, is moving these categories around. Does that answer your question?
The conclusion I guess I'm drawing is it likely that an individual without a license or without an insurance would not appear on this unless they had a moving violation in conjunction with it?
Correct. Yes, or some other legal reason to stop them.
Right, okay.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I assume that
Yeah, like a defect. If they have a tail light out, or if they don't stop for a red light or something like that, then that additional, then it's discovered that this person doesn't have either insurance or a license with them.
Well, but tag, though, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if somebody sees an out-of-date tag, that's reason to pull them over, right?
You're correct.
Okay, so, it's kind of a moving, it's kind of not a moving, but there you have reason to pull them over. So it's not because of speed or incorrect turn or something.
Right, and I know people think if a car's in motion, then it's a moving violation. That's not always applicable.
Well, I think that's why your insurance and your license are such bigger numbers, is because they are secondary and they are being found because of these others. So the other numbers might be lower, but these are higher because, how do I put this? The only way you find it out is you got stopped for something else.
Well, I mean, I mean, like the insurance and license stuff, I mean, well, I mean, not the license, the insurance issue, I mean, to be blunt, you're stopping somebody for a traffic violation or a defect, and then they don't have insurance. That you're stopping poor people, probably. I mean, that's part of that, because that's, you know, they can't afford the insurance, perhaps. And then that gives you a really high number on the RRI because of the economic circumstances of the people being stopped, probably.
So yeah, you're getting a secondary item here that is common, you know, the other thing is that these people, you don't know if they've been stopped before, you have to go to court, maybe to prove this, they can't get off work, or they can't go to court, they can't get there. I mean, I've sat in court a few times because of my kids, but years ago, and I was amazed at how many people, you know, when they finally did show up, they said, well, you haven't shown up for a couple of times. They're poor. They can't get there.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and so these statistics can reflect more than just stopping and going, and, you know.
I mean, I think
That's my point.
I think looking at the RRI data, and it's not good data. I mean, it's not helpful, but it's helpful in some respects. It's not good because it does show that blacks and Hispanics are being pulled over a higher proportion, perhaps, than whites, which, and so, you know, you know, if it's the miscellaneous moving violation, whatever that is 2.89%. That's almost three times the rate. That's a concern potentially.
But is that saying that black and Hispanic people are committing more crimes?
No, I'm saying.
No,
Yeah.
that's the indication.
That would be the suggestion, that they commit that crime or that violation at a higher level. And then that's where you would, that data perhaps is suspicious. But the data may be good, but the implications of the data is suspicious.
Talk about it, yeah.
Well, and devil's advocate, right? If I'm pulled over, a 63-year-old white woman, for one of these, I might get a pass, perhaps, you know, depending on the officer or whatever. But if it's, you know, a woman of color, then perhaps she won't get the pass if she doesn't have her insurance with her, or her license. So, I mean, there's so many shades of gray, but I don't think that needs to detract from these numbers here, which are compelling and disturbing.
Another side of that coin is the fact that the reason that the, say, the license violation or an insurance violation might be attention grabbing higher is because that might be used as a verbal warning given for one thing and then a citation issued for the other, whether it be a license violation or an insurance card not being in possession. So, but we don't know that for each one.
Because we don't know the context of what happens in each individual stop. We don't.
That's right.
Yeah, perfect.
Stats are good and they give you a place to go or to start, but stats are just that, they're numbers, they're not people. I mean, they don't, you know, I can say, you know, everybody in this room got a 50% raise, and that sounds, you go, wow, but you were all making $1 an hour, okay? And you got a 50% raise, as opposed to all of you sitting here making $100,000 a year, and you got a 50% raise. So what I'm saying is these statistics are all, but you need to know a little more than just read the number.
So let's,
Yeah, thanks.
let's bring this to a point. We have this reporting now. The board want it on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis? And do we want to schedule this for a more detailed analysis on a quarterly basis or a semi-annual basis? How do we want to handle that?
Well, I would like somebody to address these radically high numbers. If it's the chief, has he seen it? Not yet. What's his response? Or the deputy chief, somebody.
So I guess the option you decide then is, take what we talked about, we'll take the minutes, take this, I set up a meeting with the chief, discuss if we want to put on an agenda item, come back, or do another, it maybe doesn't make sense to do like just another report, but then come back and have it as an agenda item.
Well, I think what Twyla is suggesting is that we have an agenda item for a response, to have the department articulate its response to this data, and that would, I think, is a suggestion.
Okay.
And then the question is when to do that.
Yes.
That I can work on.
Jay, I would like to compliment Brian and Dane for an excellent job of moving forward. We're still not there, but we certainly have a much better report this time than you started with. This isn't easy to do, and I know that you've done your best to try to give us some information, so thank you.
You're welcome.
But I would like to bring your attention to a couple things that I hope that this board will look at. It starts with a stop. All of these citations happen because somebody decided, oh, you've done something wrong, I'm going to pull you over. And disproportionately, it's been blacks in this city forever. It's not new. We're now seeing the data. But one of the things that I would like to ask is whether or not, while we've got good officers here, Captain Hunt, who maybe you can describe this, we have infant seat violations. Black mothers are, I think, at one point, 25 times more likely to get a ticket for not having an infant in a seat. But I understand there's a program where the mothers, instead of getting a ticket, would get an infant seat. Is that still going on?
I can speak to that, Mr. Trouble. So in this between the last meeting.
Can we have it on mic, please?
Between the last meeting and now, there's two things that we've been working on getting set back up and in place. One is a infant seat program through our department. We've been working with our community support specialists. We've identified, tried to identify some funding. We're trying to identify the process as how that would work. We don't have it in place enough that I wanted to present it at this point with this data, but that is being put into place. I hope to have something for you by next month with an actual program that exists. The other is something that we had talked about in the past for the fix-it ticket type violations, where there was a program out of Minnesota, and it was a ISON, federally funded program, I believe. We have been trying to get in touch with them. I'm not sure what their functionality is at this point, so we're looking at whether we can still use that program or look to go to something of our own that's the same type of thing. You're talking about defect citations. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that Sherman from Lights On Program called me earlier this week. He's supposed to be sending me some data and information, so he reached out to me a couple of days ago.
Okay, because as of earlier this week, we had contact with them. So those are the two
You're the
things.
captain of Patrol North.
I am.
Do your officers not give a voucher for defects? I notice on these data right here, you've got under data of the citations that have been issued in this period of time, 900 and some, was that correct, for defects? Why we're not giving vouchers instead of giving them tickets?
Well, at this point, because we didn't have the participation with the program still, that's what we're trying to get back up. We had it for a while, and go ahead, Captain, sorry.
Well,
You've seen it
again, I think there's, looking at this data, everything is different. If a vehicle has been involved in a vehicle pursuit with an officer or something along those lines, that person isn't going to get a voucher. So again, you have to look at the situation surrounding it, the context of the stop, the interaction, and so there's other things that play into that scenario as well. And again, some of this did go by the wayside, especially with COVID. Our numbers certainly dropped because there was a kind of a directive, and even our traffic unit disbanded, or not really disbanded, was assigned different duties because they didn't want that officers interacting with the citizen. So some of this has fallen by the wayside, but Captain Easter is working to get it back up to where it needs to be.
Well, I'm looking at the most common charges issued.
Okay.
And below speeding, which was 26,000. The next highest are all economic. Driving without a license, expired tag, no proof of insurance, no valid driver's license. Now, if you combine no driver's license with driving on suspended or revoked, those would probably be combined, but my point is, we're looking at thousands of people that are academically stressed, and then they got a ticket with court costs and fines. Why is it that we have to penalize people for being poor?
You need to talk to your legislators. They made the law. That's right. I mean, I'm sorry, guys, but, the policemen are enforcing the law. They can't pick and choose what laws they enforce. And so I agree with you. But the point is that these laws are made by white middle-class men, for the most part, who have not a clue. So that's my opinion. I'm sorry, but the truth is that some of these laws, what we're finding is they do go against the poor, but I'm sorry, they're a law. If you don't like the law, it's your legislator you got to talk to. And good luck on that.
Except that when you look at the RRI index, when you look at that data, it shows that blacks are getting many more tickets for those violations than white and Hispanics. So there's discretion apparently at the time of the stop. I think that's what Farley was pointing out. Is that right?
There is discretion. Why don't we, valuable discussion, but why don't we make an agenda item on this? And categorize it as response of the department to the data. And so that the department come in and say, we've been thinking about it. Here's what we think it means. This is how we think we should try to solve the problem, and have that discussion on a regular agenda item. Is that okay?
Can I make a suggestion maybe for enhancing the data we have here? If I look at page 13, the most common charges issued, can you break that down racially? Each one of these?
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that I wanted to do, was have essentially most common charges issued for the focus groups for the different RRI. I didn't know if it'd be too lengthy, but that is something that I can produce.
That would be great. And then Captain Easter, on the vouchers, is because we only meet monthly, and things sometimes fall off of agendas, or we forget to bring it forward. Can you fast track this, vouchers? I hope that we're not sitting here 6 months from now talking about these vouchers.
I'll do what I can.
Okay.
I mean, that's what I can tell you. When I tell you, that's what I'll do.
Okay.
I mean, I want to tell you things, but I don't want to give you promises as well.
Yeah.
I understand exactly what you're saying, that you don't want to just hear about it over and over.
Right. That'd be great. And then we're going to have this data going forward, which is awesome. So then I guess we'll have comparative. Have you thought about comparative, quarter to quarter?
Yeah, I was thinking once we hit the 2-year mark, once we hit April, that would be a really good time period to actually start getting some comparative data sets. That way we can look at year. But at any time I can do any kind of comparative data set between years. So.
Well, anything you think of will be better than what I think of.
Oh, no.
Good, thanks.
I would love to see the math.
Okay.
That's what I would love to see. I was a math teacher, high school teacher for a number of years, so I would love to see the math, how you all come up with it. So.
Okay, can do.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask that they come back next month with these revisions that we've talked about, kind of a work in process, and then we can go quarterly perhaps. But like this last one that you just pointed out, Twyla, most common charges, if that's broken down by race, it's much more meaningful.
Okay.
It's kind of like the ROI data. It's broken
Right.
down by race.
So you just want a individual sheet for do you just want for Black, Hispanic, and white? That way it's the RRI targets, or?
Yeah, for your basic categories of race, Black, Hispanic, Asian, white, and so forth.
Okay.
That'll give us a relationship back to the RRI data, which I think will be very helpful.
We have it in these charts, but it's not tied to economics.
No, that's not.
Right?
Nope.
This is much more specific, really. You can see what kind of charges people are getting. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the reporting item that we put on there, just to keep track of it. Citizen requests for review. I'm not aware of any new citizen requests for review in the last month, but I think maybe we should use this as an opportunity to identify cases for a subcommittee. And looking at the cases that are now pending, Captain, you want to write this down. I suggest that we pull, and these are cases previously identified or identified today, that we pull 22 PSB 5394, 22 PSB 5200, and 22 PSB 4979 for review by a subcommittee. And the process that we've agreed on at the last several meetings is that we would have a subcommittee of 3 members who would then schedule with Captain Easter or someone else a meeting in a conference room at the police department or whatever, and would do a preliminary review of those cases and determine if those cases warrant review by the full board. The process is Walt, you don't necessarily know this, but the rest of us do. We sometimes pull a case for review and we look at it and we kind of ask ourselves, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And so we thought if we had periodically identified a select number of cases and had a subcommittee review those cases, that we might be able to more expeditiously have a larger review. And if those cases that the subcommittee determines there's nothing there on, then they would just be set aside, and we would. But if they determine that really needs to be addressed, then they would put it in for the full review. That's the process we agreed on. Is that okay? And then, if that is okay, who wants to be on the first subcommittee?
Me.
Me.
Ricardo Twyla?
You can put me on there too.
Okay, and Kevin. All right, you 3 are on the subcommittee for this, and you need to get with Captain Easter then and schedule a time, preferably before the next meeting, to review those cases.
I will get some things set here soon, and I'll reach out to you by email and try to figure out time, locations that work, and we'll have just a little bit of time in between to get them pulled, get them done, and then I'm thinking somewhere midterm in between, maybe with a couple weeks before, somewhere in there, right in the middle, then you can still come back, have your ideas for what you think for the full board, and then still prepare for the board meeting. That's my plan at this point. So I'll reach out to you by email and we'll go from there.
And then what kind of report back do you want from the subcommittee?
I think at the next meeting, or you could do it by email, just say that the subcommittee met and recommends no further review of these cases, and or that you flag this case for review, and then we'll just put it on the agenda.
Right. Simple enough?
Mr. Chairman, could you help us understand, you have selected 3 cases.
Yes.
What was the process that you used to select the wheat from the chaff? How did you decide these are the 3?
These are cases that have all previously been identified by the board to review.
Okay.
And I just picked the 3 arbitrarily. The board, either at previous meetings or this meeting, had identified those cases for review.
I see.
So we have a collection of now 7 or 8 or 9 cases that are pending, and I just picked 3 of them.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. The next agenda item, and I'm going to ask the indulgence of the board. We have the gunshot policy review, Janet had asked for that policy. She's not here today. But we also have 2 executive sessions, including a complainant here who wants to speak on an issue. I would suggest that we defer the review of the gunshot detection policy to another meeting so that we can move to executive session and address the cases we have pending. Is there any objection to that?
I'm in agreement with it.
Everybody okay with that? All right. So why don't we do that? And then that brings the next agenda item is executive session. And Dana Schmidt is here, so she will be attending the first part of the executive session, who has a complainant. I move the Citizen Review Board recess into executive session for 42 minutes to receive information regarding reports in the Wichita Police Department pursuant to KSA 75-1419B1, to discuss personnel matters of non-elected personnel and to protect privacy interests of identifiable individuals. The purpose of this will be to review case numbers 21 PSB 6242 and 22 PSB 2369.
Thank you, good job.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
let's go back in open session. We'll open the door.
Live.
What's it- How much longer do you think we need? Let's go another 15 minutes.
Yeah, I can do 15 minutes.
Oh, we're back in open session. We need to extend the executive session. I move that the executive session be extended for an additional 15 minutes. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, we'll go back into executive
live, Jay.
All right, we're now back in public session after completing our review of 21 PSB 6242. In the context of that, the board takes no action at this time. The next item on the agenda would be the continued review of 22 PSB 2369, which is a case that's been held over. It's the recommendation of the chair that that be once again deferred. Is that satisfactory to the board?
No.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any new business?
I don't know necessarily that's new business, but Captain Easter, it would be helpful, like at the beginning of every meeting, if you could like introduce all the WPD folks that are in the room.
Apologize.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, I should remember from month to month, but sometimes I don't. And a while back, this is well before I was on the board, and there was, I can't remember the topic, but it came to the board's attention that there was no defined policy, step-by-step, here you go, ma'am, on how external complaints are supposed to be handled within the department. Carl Lemons was tasked with that project. I don't know that it was ever completed. I believe, Captain Easter, that when I brought this up last year, you said there definitely was a policy on that, or maybe policy is not the right word.
On how external complaints are handled?
Handled.
Well, I believe it was all within policy 905.
Because he was working on something step by step, because he shared it with me, right? And then I was helping him kind of beef it up a little bit, put a little more words around it where it might be easier to understand, and then we were both distracted by other things and it fell through, so I don't know that it ever actually happened.
It was Lieutenant Lemons?
I have what he
So
shared with me.
How external complaints are handled? Okay.
What steps it goes through, because I was surprised, and I remember the board being surprised that there wasn't anything firmly documented on that.
Yeah, because is it policy 905 that talks about administration?
He'll know.
Yeah, I will give it.
Yeah, and then perhaps Captain, the guy before you.
Nicholson?
Yeah, he might know too.
I will inquire.
Okay.
I have a quick question for Sergeant Kimball. Has a new Citizens Police Academy class been formed?
Yes, I sent Jay an email today about it to get the information out. It's going to start on Monday, March. We have to push it back 1 week for scheduling issue.
Right, and I'll make the announcement here that if to any members, Paula, you've done it now, haven't
I
you?
have.
Any members who haven't completed their requirements, this would be a good opportunity to get that done. And I will send your flyer around to everybody.
I highly recommend it.
Oh, yes.
I was reluctant. It's just like, oh God, one more thing to do. And I enjoyed the heck out of it. My husband came with me, and it changed his view on policing. And that's saying a lot.
All right,
I
It's
enjoyed
so
mine
good.
too.
we have now lost our quorum, so the only thing we can do officially is move to adjourn. But before that, I want to, the person who made the complaint has come back into the room, and I wanted to tell you, ma'am, that we very much considered and appreciated your presentation. We've had an extended discussion on the presentation. You should understand that we have listened to what you have said. The board, however, is not taking any action on your complaint, but we appreciate your bringing it forward. Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Second?
Second.
Aye. All in favor, say aye. All right, thank you.
I
Our next meeting, by the way, will be the regular time.
It'll be what?
The regular day in February.
Oh.